Flyers. They were not uncommon at all in the domain of Q, at least a dozen. Worlds sported human-derived flying species of one kind or another. Most resembled the bats or the pterosaurs of the bygone past, dancing through the ether like angels, or demons, depending on the point of view. There were a few bizarre kinds relied on swollen gas glands for flotation as well. Sadly, most of these creatures were already too specialized to be anything but flyers. They had forsaken their humanity for the conquest of the sky. They had little potential for further radiation beyond their limited roles. The only exception proved out to be a monkey-like species that flew on wing membranes stretched across the last two fingers. Their advantage was a unique turbine-like heart, artificially developed. During the regime of Queen, no other human flyer in the galaxy had such an adaptation. The starfish-shaped organ sat in the middle of their chests, directly funneling oxygen from the lungs to the bloodstream in a supremely efficient way. This meant that the flyers could develop energy-consuming adaptations such as large brains without having to give up their power of flight. Not that the flyers were going to reclaim their sentience right away. Instead, they literally exploded into skies, filling the heavens with anything from bomber-sized sailors to impossibly fast predators that raced with sound. Their world was pristine and there were plenty of niches to play in. Intelligence could wait a little more. Hand flappers. Some flying posthumans reapproached sentience in an entirely different way. Without the augmented metabolisms or the gravitational advantages of their siblings on distant planets, they had no choice but to give up their power of flight in order to develop. Further, the hand flappers were one such species. Their wings, once used for butterfly-like flutters in the unearthly gardens of Q, had shrunken and reverted back into their manual condition. Their legs were likewise readapted, but they bore a splayed awkwardness from their perching ancestry. Only a singular and an almost sadistically simple flaw held them back from developing civilization. In the course of their secondary atrophy, the wings of the hand flappers had become useless as hands as well. Their flag-like appendages were very useful in signaling and mating dances, but they couldn't hurl missiles, construct shelter, or even manufacture basic stone tools. All that they could do with their useless hands was to display each other's sexual availability, so the hand flappers did just that, flashing and dancing their way to oblivion. Blind folk. When the Q came, they dug in, and dug in deep, inside several continent-sized shelters under their besieged world. They waited for the invaders to pass them by. It was a futile gamble. The Q located the shelter caves and remade their inhabitants without effort. The shelters became home to an entirely different ecology, a realm of perpetual darkness, fueled by the trickle of water and nutrients from the world outside. A surprisingly complex ecology developed. On this scant resource, gigantic pale insects, the descendants of common household pests, competed with dolly-esque birds and rodents over fields of overgrown fungi. Predators were not uncommon. Almost crocodilian fish patrolled the underground. Streams and vast blind bats, echolocating with unnerving precision, took their toll on the residents of the cave floor. The kilometer-high ceilings of the shelters glowed in the dark with protean constellations of bioluminescent fungi, and in some cases, animals. People were present here as well, albeit in unfamiliar forms. They were more often heard than seen, as they tried to find their way in. The dark with banshee-like screams. These albino troglodytes lived in a realm where sound and touch, not sight, was the gateway of perception. They had developed long, tactile fingers, enormous whiskers, and mobile ears to live in the dark. Where their eyes should have been, there was nothing but a patch of haunting, flawlessly smooth skin. Their perfect adaptation to the world of darkness had erased the most basic feature of human recognition. As adapted as they were doomed. Before the blind folk could develop any kind of intelligence to crawl out of their geographical graves, the glacial constriction of their worlds, continental plates snuffed out the shelters one by one. Lopsiders. The Ku were grotesquely creative in their redesign of the human worlds. One group of misfortunate souls they transported to a planet with 36 times the amount of normal gravity and made them over for life in this bizarrely inhospitable realm. The results of these experiments resembled nightmare sketchings of Bosch, Dali, or Picasso. They looked like cripples squashed between sheets of glass. 3 out of their 4 limbs had become paddle-like. Organs for crawling, only one of their arms remained as spindly tool of manipulation. This singular wizened limb also doubled as an extra sensor, like the antennae of an insect. Their faces were different horrors altogether. All pretensions of symmetry, the hallmark of terrestrial animals from jawless fish, onwards, were completely and utterly done away with. One bulging eye stared directly upward while the other scanned ahead, in the direction of the creature's vertically opening jaws. The ears were likewise distorted. Monstrous as they looked, these X-Men thrived in their heavy gravity environment. Once again, there was the usual explosion of species into every available niche, and the Lopsiders consolidated their chances for a renewed sentience, Striders. While the Lopsiders were redesigned to live under extreme gravity, another species had been adapted for life under the exact opposite conditions. On a Jovian moon with 1/5 of Earth's gravity, it was a world of wonders where even the grass grew almost 10 meters tall and the trees were beyond belief, towering to sizes attained only by the skyscrapers of antiquity. In these surreal forests lived equally spectacular fauna, the descendants of pets, pests, and livestock of humans, who in turn had been reduced to animosity as, well, one could see them in the league-tall forests, almost dancing among the trees as they reared higher and higher to browse. Their arms, legs, and necks had been stretched impossibly thin, great flaps of skin blossomed throughout their bodies to dispense waste heat. Sometimes they would even change their color in order to reflect light and keep cool. Overheating was a great problem for their grotesquely tall, thin bodies. Although imposing, these Jacometian wraiths were developed as to be sickeningly fragile, even on their gravitationally forgiving world. A fall could shatter their bones, and slipping down from a branch would prove to be fatal. Sometimes on the open plains, even a strong wind could bring them down like the toppling masts. They survived entirely due to the merciful conditions of their garden world, which were about to change drastically. About 2 million years after the Q left their towering works of human art, a lineage of fearsome predators evolved from the terrestrial poultry that had gone feral on the planet, resembling attenuated versions of their dinosaur ancestors. The predators swept through the garden world like wildfires, extinguishing any species too fragile to escape or resist. The peaceful, delicate Striders were among the first to go. Parasites. Humanity had diverged into 2 separate lineages on their world. On one hand, there were several races of almost Australopithecine cripples, degraded by the Qiu for managing to turn back their initial wave of invasion. Yet simple atavism was too light a punishment for them. Their twisted relatives, the parasites, made up the second part of their sentence. There were actually several kinds of parasitic X-people, ranging from tortoise-sized ambulatory vampires to the more common fist-sized variety that lived attached to their hosts. There was even a tiny endoparasitic kind that infested the wombs of their female victims, like ghastly, living abortions. All of these evolutionary tortures were played out under the careful scrutiny of the Q for 40 million years. The punishment was so baroque, so elaborate that most of the artificial parasite host Relationships died out when the Q left. Some submen learned to cleanse their tick-like relatives by drowning, burning, or even eating them. Others, like the vaginal parasites, died out as their aggressive method of parasitism effectively sterilized their hosts. Yet, one or two varieties did manage to cling on to their hosts with abdominal suckers, muscular, gripping limbs, and sterile pain. Soothing saliva. But their success did not lie entirely in the strength of their parasitical advantages. They also learned to regulate their dumb hosts, not killing them by over-infestation and thus ensuring their own long-term survival as well. In any case, totally single-sided relations were rare in any ecology, natural or artificial. In millennial cycles, the cousin species vicious. Parasitism began to give way into something more beneficial for both sides. Fingerfishers. Their ancestors were trapped on an archipelago world, a planet, sprinkled with many small continents and countless islands over. Interconnected networks of calm, swallow seas. Like a magnified Aegean, this place was a terrestrial paradise in many respects. Except that after the Q, no minds were left to enjoy it. On this vacant biosphere, evolution was quick to begin her blind, unpredictable dance. Once feral, the descendants of degenerate. Humans adapted themselves to every available niche, no matter how exotic, how outlandish. One group learned to pluck fish from the lazy shores. Millennia passed and they settled more into their piscatorial lifestyle. Elongated fingers became ambulatory fish hooks, teeth. Modified for a generalized diet became needle-like affairs, lined up neatly in a long, thin muzzle. In less than a few million years, the fingerfishers established themselves as a prominent lineage. There was scarcely a beach, an island, or an estuary that was devoid of their pale, lanky forms. As prolific as they were, the fishers were still no better than animals. Their humanity would come only after another spasm of outlandish adaptations. Hedonists. Even the blissful existence of the fingerfishers would have seemed bothersome to the hedonists, for their kind was not evolved, but designed for a life of pleasure. The Q had kept them as pampered pets, set loose in a tropical island world of succulent fruits, bountiful trees, and calm, lapping lakes full of sweet, bacterial manna. Furthermore, the hedonists were left as the only animal life on this place. They had no choice but to enjoy it to the fullest. In normal conditions, any given species would quickly crowd out. Such an utopian environment. But normal conditions had never been the point of the Q redesign. They had altered their subjects so that they could conceive only after mating an enormous number of potential suitors continually over a period of decades. While this took care of the population problem, it also made the species less adaptable. Without any point in sexual competition, natural selection would progress only at a glacial pace. Fortunately, they're stable. Microcosm remained free of environmental catastrophes even after the Q left. All these changes had also made the hedonists day. Their lives were juxtaposed routines of browsing, sleeping, and mind-blowing sex, troubled neither by the concerns of disease or pregnancy. Aloof and carefree, they enjoyed the most pleasurable times of all mankind, albeit with the intellectual capabilities of 3-year-olds. It didn't really matter, though. Who needed to think when having such a nice time after all? Insectophagy. Nondescript, quaint human species abounded in the post-Q galaxy. Hundreds of them lived out simple, unnoticed lives, never developing, to become sentient, never learning their true heritage as starborn human beings. Most of them went extinct, not to be missed or even remembered. Those that lingered on managed to survive in shady, quiet niches, never again making any impact on the celestial scheme of things. One such species was the Insectophae. They had quietly adapted themselves for a diet of colonial insects and small animals, they had. Faces covered with leathery plates, claw-like hands to dig out prey, and worm-like tongues to scoop them up. All in all, they weren't special in any particular way, but a combination of galactic invasions, coincidence, and pure luck would later make them the longest enduring of all Ur-Starmen. The meek would inherit the cosmos, though not just yet. For now, the Insectophagi were concerned only with the location of insect colonies and the onset of the mating season. Spacers. It must be remembered that the Star People did not succumb entirely to the Qiyu invasions. While their worlds fell away one by one, some Star People took refuge in the void of space. One after another, entire communities scrambled into generation ships and cast themselves off into the darkness, hoping to go unnoticed by the beings that had overrun their galaxy. Desperate times made for desperate measures, as the Starmen had observed during their initial colonization of the galaxy. Life in generation ships inevitably lead to mass insanity and anarchy. This time, however, humans had to adapt themselves or face extinction. Entire asteroid fields were confiscated and hollowed out to make spaceships of unseen size. These hollow shells cradled bubbles of precious air and water, but no artificial gravity of any kind. It was discovered that a purely ethereal existence would ease the stress of interstellar exile, provided that its inhabitants were adapted for life inside such an environment. Furthermore, people were forced to change themselves. In a atmospherically sealed, gravity-free environment, their bones were left free to grow longer, thinner, spindlier. The circulatory and digestive systems were pressurized to avoid heart problems and congestion. The latter change had another advantageous side effect. Humans could navigate through the void with jets of air expelled from modified anuses. Such experiments were numerous and usually plagued with failure. Yet they did succeed in creating a future, sealed tight in their moon-sized, air-filled, weightless havens, the descendants of the star. People managed to evade the scourge of Q. It was an endless diaspora. Even after the Q left, they would find themselves too divergent to have anything to do with their ancestral lifestyles. The survivors of the initial hurdle would never set foot on a planet again. Ruin Haunters, a particular human species singled out by its lucky access to the heritage of its stellar ancestors, would eventually get to play a leading role in the shape of things to come. They had gotten through the Q invasion with relatively little degradation. Yes, they had been reduced to the level of apes, but their recovery had been quick. Apparently, the Q had not worked as hard at suppressing their intelligence, nor had they made a comparable effort to wipe away the material traces of the Starmen. Even after millions of years, enormous ruins of the global urban spaces littered the continents of their world. Thus did the Ruin Haunters earn their names. With developed minds and unrestricted access to the wisdom of the ancient cities, the exponential pace of their development was only natural. One by one, they deciphered and built upon the secrets of the bygone Star People until they almost equaled their galactic ancestors in wisdom and skill. All of this development happened in an unnaturally short period of time, and sometimes the old technologies were not even understood, as they were blindly replicated. Needless to say, such a pace of development put premature stresses on the social and political structures of the Ruin Haunters. They barely survived the 5 consecutive world wars that raked their planet, 2 of which were thermonuclear exchanges. They made it through. Their baptism with fire had hardened and awakened them. The wars united them politically and pushed their technological capabilities even beyond the level of the Starmen. Incidentally, they also developed a dangerous form of autochthonous madness. The Ruin Haunters had come to believe that they were the sole descendants and the true heirs of the Star People, and they were ready and willing to do anything in order to claim their Fictitious, bygone golden age. Sentience reborn. If any sort of periodical arrangement can be brought to the history of mankind, the post-Q era of emerging human animals can be likened to a series of millennial dark ages. However, like any dark age situation, these periods of silence had finite lifespans. One by one, like stars emerging from the fog, new civilizations were born out of the shattered remnants of mankind. In some rare cases, the recovery was swift and straightforward. In most other situations, it came only after a lengthy series of adaptive radiations, extinctions, and secondary diversifications. Within these lines of descent, there was as much distance between the initial post-humans and their intelligent descendants as between the first Cretaceous fuzzballs and Homo sapiens. Sooner or later, human intelligence returned to the cosmos. But, except from their shared ancestry, these new people had nothing in common with people of today or even each other. Extinction. Not all human animals made it through. In fact, it must be realized that the majority of post-Q humans died out during the eras of transition. Extinction, the utter and absolute death of an entire family, entire community, entire species, was rampant in the galaxy. There was nothing cruel or dramatic in all of this. Extinction was as common and as natural as speciation. Sometimes a species simply failed to adapt to competition or the abrupt change of conditions. In other occasions, their numbers dwindled across imperceptible gulfs of time. This way or the other, human animals faded out. In all of this death, however, there was new life. As one species vacated a certain niche, others would soon step in to take its place. Adaptive radiations would follow, filling in the blanks with myriads of diverse and varied forms. Despite the fallen, the flow of life would proceed, blazing in constant turnover. Snake people, descendants of the worms. The scorching sun eventually cooled down and life flooded back to the surface from her subterranean stronghold. As animals of all kinds exploded into the terrestrial niches that had been left vacant for millennia, so did the descendants of the worms. On the surface, they found new opportunities as entire assemblages of serpentine, grazers, swimmers, predators, and people. One form descended from tree-climbing mammalian. Snakes re-evolved the human intelligence that had lain dormant for so long. They observed, contemplated, and philosophized with novel, spirally coiled brains and handled the world with a singular pelvic hand, born out from the remnants of their ancestors' feet. They looked nothing at all like their distant human ancestors, but their social development followed a similar path. Several agricultural world empires, followed by industrial revolutions, social experiments, world wars, civil wars, and globalization. But then again, political parallelism in history did not necessarily imply a similar, or even recognizably human world. Modern cities of the global snake world were tangles of pipe-like roads, branching, three-dimensional railroads, and windowless, hole-like buildings. Though their knotted architecture differed from region to region, these settlements generally looked like kilometer-wide balls of glass, metal, plastic, and cloth wrapped so tightly that a human of today would find it impossible to move inside them. Plazas and open areas were totally absent as they presented navigational obstacles in areas of insecurity. Their evolutionary background in the trees had made the snake people into borderline agoraphobes. None of these, of course, was unusual to the snakes in any way. Their relatively alien lifestyle was as particular to them as ours is to us. All across their world, the arterial cities throbbed with people, each seshde smit devates, with their own joys, sorrows, and chores, living out lives as human as any other intelligent beings. Killer folk, descendants of the human predators. The carnivores also rebounded into civilization. Their journey involved a series of changes during which they lost the adaptations that had allowed them to endure as the top predators of their world. The saber teeth, once used for slashing through sinew and trachea, became fragile and thin, useful only as organs of social display. The hook-like thumb claws were also reduced, but not deleted. In their place, the last two digits rotated perpendicularly to become newfangled graspers. All this gracility, however, did not mean weakness. Although they were no longer specialized for hunting, the killer folk could still kill with their bare hands, but only if they really wanted to. What enormous claws and teeth could not do, they could easily achieve with bow, arrow, flintlock repeater, or gas rifle. Their descent from predators gave the killer folk a unique social profile. Almost all of their religions had rituals allowing for periods of completely natural, animalistic hunts and duels. This necessity of venting these atavistic urges also led to the formation of religious hunter nobilities, privileged warriors who were skilled in the arts of hunting, war, and murder. Entire societies were assembled. Underneath these ruling classes, orderly communities that erupted once every year into an orgy of death, sex, and prayer. For thousands of years, nomadic warriors, together with their vast herds of once human livestock, chased and battled each other across a chessboard of continents. All of this chaos was to be swept apart with the advent of modernity. In a development comparable to an industrial revolution, one nation, pack of killers devised methods of settled, intensive factory farming, organized state structure, secularism, and technological leap. Frogging were quick to follow. Needless to say, such developments polarized the world into bands of progressive, developed factory herders and, increasingly, fanatical hunting states, while one side condemned their old 71 animal ways, the other side embraced them with blind zealotry. This was their crisis of modernity, the balkanization of the progressive and conservative factions on the road to global unity. Fortunately, the killers managed to pull themselves through, even after drifting dangerously close to global conflict at certain points.